Well, good morning, everybody. If it's your first time here, welcome. My name is Ryan. I'm the pastor here at CIB. I feel like I do this too many times during the year, but I want to start with a disclaimer before this morning's lesson, this morning's sermon. What we're talking about today is a difficult problem that goes on in our world that is very simple to fix. And I want to say this morning that as I go through this lesson, as we go through it together, that I realize I'm kind of speaking to the choir this morning. I realize that what we're looking at in this message is something that so many of us here already do and are already a part of. And so if you are listening to this morning and you start to think, why is he coming down on me for that? I already do this. I'm not coming down on you. But it helps us to be reminded of these things because this problem is still at work in our world. But first, let us hear from Mr. Warren Buffett.
This is Warren Buffett, one of the richest people in the world, thanks to the company he runs, Berkshire Hathaway. Basically, it's a holding company that just owns a bunch of other companies, Geico, Dairy Queen, a huge railroad, as well as a lot of stock in other companies like Apple and Coca-Cola. So when those companies do well and their stock goes up, Berkshire Hathaway stock goes up. When Buffett took over the company in 1965, a single share was worth $19. Today, it's worth nearly $500,000. Buffett owns nearly 240,000 of these shares. This is where his wealth is. But as he's been known for pointing out, Warren Buffett still pays a lower tax rate than his secretary.
She pays at twice the rate I pay. I think that's outrageous.
That's because they pay different types of taxes. His secretary pays income taxes on her salary, but Buffett mainly pays capital gains taxes on his sold stock, and that's taxed at nearly half the rate.
The wealthy are definitely undertaxed.
In the U.S., the disparity between the richest Americans and everyone else has been growing. And in the last 40 years, the after-tax income of the richest has risen more than 400%, while middle-class income has only risen 50%. The way these people make money is very different than the way these people make money. And they're not taxed the same.
I pay less in taxes than people that work for a living and make as much money as I do.
This is Morris. He used to work on Wall Street. Now he's retired and lives off his many stock market investments.
I own stock in companies, Berkshire Hathaway and Amazon and Apple.
He's a pretty typical one-percenter, except that he spends his money advocating for rich people like him to be taxed more.
I want to live in a country filled with a middle class of people who can all afford to shop in our businesses.
Most people have a normal job. They get a paycheck and pay income tax, ranging from 10 to 37%. But people like Morris, they make a lot of their income from investments, generally stocks and real estate. These investments are taxed as capital gains, and things like long-term stock have a maximum tax rate of just 20%.
I sold some stock recently for $400,000, and my taxes on that have around $50,000. But that $50,000 is far less tax than anyone who has a job making $400,000 a year would pay.
And most of his wealth, well, isn't even taxable. People like Morris or Buffett are worth so much money because of the stock that they hold, but it's not tangible, spendable, taxable money.
I can look at my stock portfolio and I can say, I made $1 million this year, but it doesn't mean I have to pay anything in taxes because our system is based on only paying taxes when you actually sell something.
Amazon's Jeff Bezos, the richest man in America thanks mostly to his Amazon stock, pays almost nothing in taxes. We value his worth here, but it's never taxed unless it's turned into real money when he sells the stock, and it's taxed as a capital gain. This is one way billionaires are able to be technically worth so much money, but pay so little in taxes. Some billionaires, like Elon Musk, are able to get loans against their stocks and live off of that. They don't even need to sell the stock to turn it into spendable money. No sale, no taxes.
The fact is, if you're a billionaire, you don't need any income.
There's also a big loophole in capital gains taxes that the rich exploit called the stepped-up basis. If, hypothetically, Warren Buffett were to sell his stock, he'd have to pay capital gains taxes based on his profit, so the cost of the stock minus the original investment. But if he holds off selling his entire life, when he dies, whoever inherits the stock and then sells it would only have to pay taxes on what they earned after they inherited it, leaving all those original gains untaxed. It's part of what's called buy, borrow, die, and it's one way the richest families avoid paying taxes. It's this system and the fact that most taxable capital gains are going to the top 1% that lawmakers see changing the capital gains tax as an easy way to tax the rich. President Biden has proposed closing that stepped-up loophole and increasing the maximum tax rate from 20% to 39.6%, but just for people making more than $1 million a year. Critics argue that it may discourage people from investing in the stock market, or that current millionaires would just sell less stock. But it would bring in more tax revenue, from more conservative estimates of $200 billion over 10 years to double that. It would also mean Buffett would pay a closer tax rate to his secretary. But this pile of unrealized money still goes untaxed.
There's a lot of things we could do to make the system more fair. We could have taxes on wealth. We could have taxes on gains in the stock market.
Most Americans are bothered that wealthy people don't pay their fair share, and changing capital gains taxes wouldn't be the whole solution, but advocates argue it would be an easy place to start.
Our system is making the rich get richer and richer and richer, and everyone else just not.
There is a lie that we are each fed daily. This lie is the very web that holds our society together. Everything, education, our dreams, our lifestyles, foreign relations, the markets, family, healthcare, yes, everything. It is the lie that there isn't enough in this world for everyone to have what they need. That is a lie. And anyone who agrees with that is believing something that's just not true. It is not a matter of opinion, it is a matter of fact. And this morning, I want to propose a possible rebuttal to this lie in hopes that it would begin to erode its foundations in each of us, if any of it is there. In the mid-1st century AD, the Apostle Paul wrote this: "I know how to live in want, and I know how to live in prosperity. Everywhere and in all things, I have learned both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to suffer need. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me." The Apostle Paul was one of the most educated, gifted figures in the early church. And this is one of the lessons that he learned, that it is Christ-like to live in places between prosperity and poverty. Those places are what we call contentment. And very few people truly live in places of contentment. I am certainly not one of them. But if you ever meet a person that is truly content, you'll know it almost immediately. They are the most generous people you will ever meet. I've even met a few of them here. But when our goals as societies get out of balance, somehow everything starts going backwards. It gets flipped. It gets distorted. We start existing in societies where, strangely, only a small minority benefit while the majority suffers. And for years, I would hear statements like that, and I would think things like, well, yeah, the world is a mess. I understand that. I realize that, but I live in the United States where we're immune from all that stuff. And maybe that was the case at the time, or maybe I just wasn't aware of reality. But today, however, the numbers show us something very different. Numbers don't have feelings. Numbers don't have motives. Numbers don't have minds. They're not trying to sell anything or to get you to believe something. Numbers are just numbers. And the numbers tell us that today here in our society, that almost 8 out of 10 U.S. citizens live paycheck to paycheck. That's not a minority. That's a majority. Look at this article from Forbes. I have to get closer to read it to you. A 2023 survey conducted by payroll.org highlighted that 78% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck, a 6% increase from the previous year. In other words, more than 3/4 of Americans struggle to save or invest after paying for their monthly expenses. Similarly, this is interesting, a 2023 Forbes Advisor survey revealed that nearly 70% of respondents either identified as living paycheck to paycheck, 40%, or even more concerning, reported that their income doesn't even cover their standard expenses. Can you imagine what it must be like to live that way on a daily basis? You're working as hard as everyone else is around you, and you still don't have enough. To always be living just really, truly one bad day away from homelessness. 8 out of 10 people. And I have to assume that those numbers, and I know that it's not accurate to count it this way, but I have to assume that the people in this room are part of those statistics. And that there are a majority of us, not a minority of us, but a majority of us in this room this morning who do not know what to do if we get paid and then we don't 30 days from then. We have no idea what we would do. That's a majority of us in this room. How did things get like this? The book of Acts is a story in the Bible about the earliest church, the primitive church, even the proto-church, if you will. And this is how the story said that the earliest Christians dealt with inequality. It reads, all the believers were one in heart and mind. No one claimed that any of their possessions was their own, but they shared everything they had. And God's grace was so powerfully at work in them all that there were no needy persons among them. Something about people believing something together and thinking something together and getting on the same page in the ways that they live always makes for better communities. And relax, I'm not announcing that we're starting a commune this morning. And I'm certainly not twisting the scriptures to support a political ideology. That's the Bible you've always read. It hasn't been updated. It hasn't been edited. It's the Bible you've read your whole life. And it teaches us that when people are willing to share, everyone has what they need. But here's the thing. It only works if everyone does it, and that's why this is so hard to deal with in legal structures and in politics. Because it can't be a law with threats behind it. Sharing is something that must be voluntary. If someone puts a gun to your head and says, "Share with me," that's not sharing. It's never been sharing. Sharing is something we do because we believe that sharing is the best way for the world to get better. The problem is so simple, and I know one of the things that just almost drives me out of my mind during every election season is that people are waiting for the government to fix this. And I can promise you today, 100 years from now, when your grandchildren are voting, the government's going to be having the same discussion. Some are going to want higher taxes, some aren't. Why do we think we need to wait on the government to get its stuff together, when the real solution to the problem is right here? It's that I don't share. I expect the government to share. You're going to reach the end of your life still waiting. We all have something to share. It might not be money, it might not be property, but it might be your talent. It might be your ability and your willingness to be a good listener. We all have something that someone else doesn't have. This is so much smaller than politics. It's right here in my heart. You know, this past week, my son and I decided to catch some bugs. I don't know why he wanted to do that. And we were hoping to catch a cockroach so we could put it under the macro lens and look up real close at its face. But our trap, made out of a tiny bottle with some cheddar cheese in it, only seemed to attract ants. I have a picture of it here you can see. Clearly, the ants did not survive on some lower level. I feel bad about that. It wasn't my intention to harm them, but they did not make it. But do you notice how they expired there? I expected to see these sort of bloated ant corpses just caked all over the piece of cheese, every one of them individually scrambling and scrapping for the last bit. But instead, in their final moments, they decided to huddle together in groups. At some point, the cheddar became less important than the colony. Who knew that some of life's greatest lessons could be learned by trapping ants? The cheese is temporary. The bottle is temporary. Even the exoskeletons of the ants are temporary. Everything is temporary. Do we realize that? Life is like a pair of shoes that we get that we are so excited about. And by the following year, we realize, I got to change these. Nothing is permanent. What are you holding on to? Why am I clinging to things? I cannot tell you definitively if there is something beyond all of this, what we experience in this life. But I do know that this isn't forever. Because I see it everywhere. I see it in my own body. I see it in my own mind. Everything is always changing. And it's always temporary. So what is the point of this life, this sensory experience, this awareness of awareness? Is it really just a space carved out of space-time where we hold on to stuff until the lights go out? Is that really what we've become? We have lost not only the ability, but the desire to be content. It is Christ-like to live in the spaces between prosperity and poverty. These places are what we call contentment. And only you know which place you're in this morning. Only I know which place I'm in this morning. And what makes it all worse is if I start trying to figure out where you are and then comparing myself to yourself to make either you feel small or me feel big. This is stuff, and I know this sounds crude, but who you really are, where you really are in this place is where you are when you're on the toilet. It's where you are in the shower. It's where you are in the most private moments of your life. You know what you believe. Do you believe that for someone else to have something, you lose something? Or do you believe that when someone else gets what they need, everybody wins? Society is better. We all know what we think about this. Will we take it from a concept, a belief, into our behavior? Because if we don't, and if the government's not going to do anything about it, nothing will change. We will keep having this discussion as a society over and over and over again for hundreds and hundreds of more years. It has to get to a place in me where I realize what I do with this is what matters most. If I want to see it, I also must start to become it. The early church understood this. And because they did, they lived in a community where everyone had everything they need. But we must all voluntarily do it together. As you go out into your life this week, I want to encourage you to look out at the world not as a place that gives you things that you want, but instead begin looking at the world as a place where we all participate so that everyone might benefit from it. Thinking of it that way will change almost everything. It'll change what you buy. It'll change what you sell. It'll change how you treat people who might be of a different socioeconomic status. All that God wants of us, truly, is to love one another. And if we do that, we will start to see a world that begins to turn. slowly and surely, little by little, communities can be healed. Let's pray.